Welcome to the Pivot Clean Energy Podcast, How the World Cooks, the energy shift you need to know about. I'm your host, Alicia El-Mamouni. On this podcast, we are going to explore everything cooking, how it impacts the world, and why you should care. Let's go. Kristy Moore is a leading authority on motor fuel quality, regulatory, safety, and environmental aspects, specializing in renewable and alternative fuels. Kristy is well known and respected throughout the industry for her depth of knowledge and expertise on gasoline and gasoline-ethanol blends. She is continuously developing opportunities for increased renewable fuel and chemical usage in domestic and global markets. Very active in ASTM International, she chairs the DO2 Petroleum Products, Liquid Fuels, and Lubricants Subcommittee 93 on international standards and related activities, and chairs a subcommittee in Committee E48, Bioenergy and Industrial Chemicals from Biomass. On today's show, Kristy lends her insight on standards to inform us about the world of standards in general and why they are important, especially in regard to how critical they are for the nascent bioethanol cooking industry. She will also share some of her firsthand experience helping to shape and implement the current bioethanol cooking fuel standard through ASTM and her optimism for the future of the sector. Get excited about standards and their impact by listening to Kristy's passion and expertise. Kristy, so happy to have you on How the World Cooks today.
Fantastic, Alicia. I love visiting with you. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Today, our show is going to address something that might not seem very exciting, but actually impacts our everyday life. And most people probably don't realize that. And we are going to talk about it in the context of bioethanol, clean cooking, and bioethanol standards. Standards are something that we rely on all the time that are really critical to having consistent quality products in the marketplace. And because bioethanol for clean cooking is a nascent market, they're that much more important to get into place. And so you have a wealth of knowledge around standards and all of the processes behind those and policy implications. And so I'm really happy to have your expertise today on the show.
Well, I am so glad to be here. When did we make that clean cooking standard? Like almost a decade ago. I feel like we have been working on this, maybe from theory and then to publication was maybe a year or two. But I didn't really understand it until I watched you in the field working, with government and industry on how to really advance, clean cooking solutions and namely bioethanol. And sometimes when we build these standards and specs, we focus so much on the science and we don't get to see the application. And in that case, it just really came full circle, for me to see, like you said, let's get the product quality, exactly where it needs to be, fairness in trade so that it can be sold and used by consumers. And it was just really, really neat to actually see it functioning, when we went to Mozambique.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I definitely want to get into that today and hear a little bit about your experience there, actually putting standards in place. But starting with you, just so our audience gets to know you a little bit, you're the owner of K-More Consulting, but you've been in the bioethanol industry for a long time. Can you tell us a little bit about the path that brought you to where you are today in your current position?
Absolutely. So I'm a nerd. I'm a chemist from Illinois State University here in Bloomington, Illinois. Well, normal, as close to normal as we get, right? And my first job was at ADM in Peoria, Illinois. It was the largest distillery in the world. It was an absolute awesome experience. I still have like great bestest friends from my first days there in 1994. This is my 30th year. Can you believe that?
Awesome.
I'm like either the smartest person or maybe a little slow. I don't know. But there at the distillery, we made about 70 different grades of product. We made it for fuels, and we made E85. We supplied all the military bases all through the 90s. It was a fabulous experience. And then we would also make ethanol for all the industrial applications. We were the first supplier to hand sanitizer, which became a big thing, right, in the pandemic.
COVID, yeah.
I know, right? And then we made ethanol for pharmaceutical use, lotions, hairsprays, soaps, etc. And then, of course, we made it for drinking and, do you know what I mean, some other liquor type applications. So it was a fabulous experience. We shipped ethanol all over the world. I got a huge experience there. And then ADM promoted me, and I went to Decatur, and I worked at the big wet mill down there, making all the sweeteners and all the feed products. It was an amazing experience. And in that same time, ethanol for gasoline blending was truly an air quality solution, just as it is today. But as we reduced, 30% of the tailpipe emissions, ethanol really expanded from not just summer air quality, but really we extended it as a cheap, clean octane improver. And then we went on to, today's use for ethanol is not, still air quality, it's still octane, but it's greenhouse gas and really
Hmm.
addressing some of these climate issues and air quality issues that we have around the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, what specifically do you do for the bioethanol industry today, like on a day to day basis?
It is hard to explain that. I'm a problem solver, but
I know.
I
Yeah.
also, we come up with these great uses for ethanol. And if we don't know what type, what quality, what quantity, those kinds of things, like I follow the physical gallon around the world. So
Hmm.
I want to make sure that wherever ethanol is going for whatever application, that it's the right quality for the commercial trade, right? And then for the ultimate, experience by the consumer, whether they're putting it in their gas tank, they're putting it in their kitchen, right,
Yep.
to cook their food with, whether we're using it for hand sanitizer or whether we're having a cocktail or, do you know what I mean, a liquor application. So
Yep.
my job is to make sure that I can facilitate that commerce, that ethanol is shipped safely, effectively, efficiently. And so I work on standards, right? So that governments can recognize the product. It can go into their commerce, whether it's in their gas tank or whether it's, in their hairspray or wherever it's going.
Hmm.
Um, make sure that it's perfect for the application at the right, at the agreed upon price and quantity.
Yep.
So I work with federal governments, both domestic and abroad. I work in all 50 of the United States. I work in about 20 countries. And so I work on safety issues like making sure that ethanol flammability is respected and that we get our product, right to the customer without any safety concerns. I work with commercial folks to make sure that they've got all the opportunities. There's some governments that if you don't have a standard, it can't be sold for commerce.
Hmm.
And so I help develop standards. Like when you came to us and said, hey, we need a standard for ethanol for cooking fuel. It's not quite the fuel application. It's not quite some of these pharmaceutical or other beverage food applications. It's somewhere in the middle, and we need a standard specific to it. And so
Hmm.
that's what we did. And I brought in a bunch of experts on this topic, and we put our heads together. And it took us about a year, of negotiating every parameter, because there's a dozen or so parameters that ethanol must meet in order for it to be fit for use, right? For cook
Yep.
stoves and cooking appliances. And so it was really, a huge educational piece. And we put all the experts in a room and really hashed it out and came out with this incredibly robust. There's a lot of extra information in there for the reader to educate them. There's information in there for the governments so that they don't tax it, like overtax it or undertax it, so
Hmm.
that it's, appropriately, enters the marketplace, and it's everybody has a great experience with it.
Yeah. No, thank you for that great description of kind of how standards work, how they play a role in the industry. It's obviously critical for commerce and for international trade. And you kind of alluded to that process. You're on several committees at ASTM and, obviously very knowledgeable about standards, especially around bioethanol. Can you just, for those who don't know, explain what ASTM is and kind of what a standards organization does?
Absolutely. I'm probably the most active in ASTM, but I think I've got an alphabet soup of about 15 standards organizations, whether it's Underwriters Laboratory or the National Fire Protection Association, et cetera, et cetera. But ASTM International is a globally recognized expert body. The society itself, I think, has about 30,000 members. I belong to about 6 or 7 of their committees that I'm really active in, on sustainability, on biomass conversion, on, petroleum products, liquid fuels. I do coal and coke because some of our biomass as fiber can be used as an energy source, right? So
Mhm.
we make standards and make sure that we can use those products. But ASTM International is a standards developing organization. It's a nonprofit that operates around the globe. They've got, I don't know, 30, 40 memorandums of understanding, MOUs, in place to help governments facilitate commerce. And it's really about describing products that can then be sold, that can then be used by the consumer. And I've been there 20 years, maybe, I think. It's kind of a long time, but we get together as a society in a subject matter expert body, and we identify gaps or needs of industry and business, and then we go to work making standards, specifications, analytical methods, guides, practices, best recommended practices on how to get things done, how to
Mhm.
describe something, how to, and they do everything from cement to playground equipment to, NASA has their own committee. We do all kinds of, space and travel. And we work in our latest effort is really the bioenergy and this industrial chemicals and things from biomass. That committee is expanding by leaps and bounds
Mhm.
because the pressure is to address this climate change and to get renewable, more sustainable products into the marketplace. And we're doing some seriously fun, hard, chemical, scientific, nerdy work to get
Yeah.
some of these renewable fuels, chemicals, into the marketplace and replace, some of these other more harmful chemicals that aren't sustainable.
Mhm. Yeah, it's super important as we begin to transition that we start to have some of those standards in place to help the industry grow appropriately. And you're obviously very familiar to the transportation industry, but you were also really helpful in getting our bioethanol cooking standard pushed through, and the whole process within ASTM. And I think a lot of these other standards organizations are so great because they rely on a lot of that expert input. They talk to
Yep.
private sector, they talk to people on the ground using the products, and really make sure that the standard that ends up being in place is appropriate and fit for purpose. And also, it's always amendable. So you can always
Yep.
put input back into the system. And it really is this collaboration of volunteers who are doing their best to create safe, quality standards.
Yes, absolutely. And they are living documents, right?
Hmm.
We publish the document. It's on a 5-year automatic renew cycle, but because this is such a growing industry, I think we're looking at these documents, every month, every three
Yeah,
months, making sure that the information is clear, concise. When you and I are working around the globe, it's got to be translatable. So we can't use
exactly.
slang. We can't use like industry terms necessarily, right? Because it's not translatable. It doesn't
Right.
translate into other languages appropriately. And so we're always looking for additional input, and we show them the standards. And ASTM International has been fantastic to us in that they facilitated discussions for us, right?
Hmm.
People are constantly approaching them. How do we get ethanol as a cooking fuel? How do we get ethanol as a transportation fuel? Who can we talk to? And because all the experts are in the room, policy, operations, manufacturing, transportation, and consumers, we can reach into this data or into this bank of experts and find an answer. It's
Yeah,
really a pretty amazing group of colleagues that we have here.
it is. Yeah. You're on our advisory council, which is part of the reason why you got pulled into helping with some of these standards adjustments. And as you mentioned, this standard was originally put in place and started maybe 10 years ago. And then you
Yeah.
worked recently with Pivot to amend and ratify ASTM E3050, which is the bioethanol cooking fuel standard. Can you just tell me a little bit about like some of the key elements that were adjusted, or that kind of that process of keeping it a living document, making sure that we have the right information in there?
Well, ethanol is heavily regulated, right? Because it can be used as a beverage, a liquor. And so we put denaturants in it, but we want to make sure we put the right denaturants in it, right? We are a solution to an air quality problem. And ethanol, bioethanol for cooking fuel, seeing those bags of charcoal on the side of the road when we were in Africa was just really eye opening for me. And
Hmm.
to know that we can provide them with a clean cooking solution, that they're not breathing in toxics and they're not breathing in soot and other, particulate matter, et cetera, that this is really a solution. But we have to make sure that we include information so that the exporters and importers, that they know exactly what the product is, that it doesn't need to be overly taxed, that it is fit for purpose, that it's going to be handled safely. We're always making sure that we have the right information and it's not buried on page 8,
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
it's really upfront and that the scope is there and that we're, telling the reader of the document exactly how the product can be used and what it's used for, and what should they expect, right?
Hmm.
What should this product look like, feel like, touch like, analytical? What does this product need to, what does it need? What are the characteristics that it needs in order for it to, be used effectively in stoves or in engines or et cetera?
Hmm.
And as you and I re-reviewed this, I think just either late last year or early this year, we took a look and said, okay, are there similarities to ethanol that can be used for road transport, right? Because we can get economies of scale, we can get better supply, cheaper supply.
Hmm.
Can we integrate the two standards? Is there an overlapping area where we can provide, the marketplace with one product, but for several applications? And I thought that was
Exactly.
really an eye-opening, exercise for you and I to compete or to complete. But then we took it and explained this to a few government agencies around the world, and I don't know that people understood that until
Hmm.
you and I did that.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really critical is to make sure that, one of the largest challenges for these operators is to get fuel in a lot of cases. And sometimes there just isn't capacity in country to provide enough bioethanol for cooking fuel and or for blending. But if countries are interested in pursuing blending economies, getting that fuel into their transportation, and also looking at clean cooking opportunities, it's a really great option for them to be able to bring one fuel into the port and put it into two different applications.
Yep.
And as you mentioned before, we put specific language in there to make sure that it was very clearly not going into the beverage industry, and that was to help eliminate some unnecessary taxation that often goes along with beverage grade
Right.
alcohol.
Right. And I think, some of the other things we put in that standard were best practices. Okay, when you see ethanol for a cooking application, it can have a blue dye. It can do
Hmm.
this. It can have this much water. It can have, some of these elements that are what I consider more experience, right? Like real world experiences. And
Right.
we put those in the document for those folks that maybe have never, right? That we're introducing this as a solution for some of their air quality and some of their domestic issues, right? As
Hmm.
far as clean energy, in order to just sustain life, right? We're cooking with this product.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the best things about ASTM is that we are focused on facilitating commerce, but also keeping, important elements such as clean air and and supply, and we can check the box on so many of those things and include that information in the standard.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah, it's pretty nerdy. It is. It's scientific, and we do have a lot of things. But I think we also put, just common sense and some general practices in there that really are helpful, right? Help them understand and that not be afraid of the product, right? Everybody's
Exactly.
always just a little afraid of new things, right? And trying new things. And I think that standard really lays out the case of why this product is very good to use, how to use it, what are the elements, and just takes away all of that and provides this real rock solid foundation to build this industry on.
Exactly. And you mentioned the denaturant, and I think that putting multiple denaturants into the standard also allows for more flexibility with producers and
Absolutely.
distributors. And maybe you can just explain what a denaturant is in a bioethanol context, just for those who may not be familiar with that vernacular?
Sure thing. And I think it's true for just about every country I've ever worked in that, ethanol for liquor has always been taxed, right? There is a beverage alcohol tax.
Yeah.
And we put in some countries, um, they recognize that, and they also recognize that if we can avoid people accidentally or purposely drinking this product, we put a denaturant so that it's a deterrent for drinking, and so it avoids some of the taxation, but it also physically deters somebody from taking
Mhm.
a sip of this product. And so
Exactly.
we put them in minimal amounts. Usually our denaturants are expensive, and so we don't want to affect the price and supply of the product. But we also need to make sure that that denaturant doesn't harm the ethanol, for that it's clean air. Do you know what I mean? It's providing
Mhm.
all these benefits so that we're avoiding the taxation and deterring people from drinking it. Yet we're also facilitating ethanol. So we picked some hydrocarbons, we picked some non-hydrocarbons, we picked, we're continuously expanding that. And I think we'll just continue to add denaturants as we expand bioethanol's use for cooking around the world, right?
Mhm.
Like if we get into all the countries in Africa, maybe there's a different denaturant that's cheap and abundant, that
Mhm.
would work for the application.
Right.
And we may, we can add that to the standard by balloting through the ASTM process, having all the experts take a look at it, and then, really facilitating its use. And
Yeah.
so usually, either in the parts per million or in the very low percentage, single digit percentages, we add these chemicals, and products to ethanol, just to, like I said, avoid the unnecessary taxation. Ethanol
Yep.
sells for about $2 a gallon. If it's taxed, it's $27 a gallon.
Yeah.
Clearly, that ruins all the economics, and it makes it too expensive, right,
Right.
for household use. And
Yeah.
so it's very important that we avoid all of those unnecessary taxes that are not applicable, but yet we facilitate ethanol, as a cooking fuel.
Absolutely. Yeah. Making sure it's safe and quality and consistent, but also ensuring it can still be competitive in the market.
Absolutely. And so
Yeah.
I think we'll just continue to expand that. We put in some language in that standard that there it could have a dye, and we like, a physical, a visual, identification that this is not for drinking, right? That we
Right.
put a blue dye in it, and then that tells people that this is not a drinkable product, that it is a fuel, that it's, meant for, ignition and for energy for cooking.
Yep. Yeah. And so to switch a little bit to something you alluded to earlier, your international travel, supporting some bioethanol efforts that you've been doing more of lately. That included supporting Pivot at one of our stakeholder engagement activities in Mozambique last year. And Mozambique is very interested in developing a bioethanol economy, and that includes clean cooking. And so one of the standards we wanted them to look at adopting was ASTM E3050. And so maybe you can just share a little bit about your experience participating in the workshop and then also seeing on the ground how these standards are going to work.
The trip to Maputo was life altering for me. I'd never been to Africa. I'm absolutely amazed and in love with the whole continent. I've since been to Nigeria, and obviously, we talked about not only bringing ethanol in for air quality and transportation fuel, but we also talked about home energy use. Maputo, I found that government and all of the stakeholders brilliant. They were so educated, so smart, so engaged in the
Hmm.
discussions. They understand their challenges, and I thought they explained and educated us on their challenges like eloquently. I really understood what they're trying to do. And we spent, a day just, engaged in back and forth dialogue about what are their challenges, how do they want to fix them, what are other, we bring a global aspect to them and a discussion that they may have not had before. And I found it simply amazing. And then they kind of talked about their regulatory process,
Hmm.
how they're going to build the policies to support this type of use and facilitate ethanol's use in Mozambique. And then on day two, when we went out to the store, we actually went to the store and saw ethanol being sold in canisters, and the local consumers coming in to buy, and they have the stoves at home, and what does it take to get the ethanol into the country and then into the
Hmm.
canisters and then out to consumers. It was amazing. I mean, it was so eye opening. I'd go back in a New York second. Like
Yeah.
it was one of the best experiences I've ever had.
Yeah. Well, you were a huge contributor to the workshop and to some of that information that was needed around standards and how that helps influence trade. And so hopefully we can get you back there to do some follow up work,
I'll
but
go.
I won't have to twist your arm.
No,
And so, as we see that movement in Mozambique, we also are working in other geographies in Africa to harmonize E3050 in these places that are looking to introduce bioethanol, either for transportation or blending and or cooking. And one of the benefits of being able to speak to the impacts of both of those is that we do have this standard that's complementary to the bioethanol blending standards that you mentioned. And so we can come in and talk about this whole suite of standards that a country could look at adopting that would really help them escalate their bioethanol economies. And so maybe you can just comment on how harmonization impacts the growth of industries, or why is it important to think about having these common standards across regions or continents?
absolutely. So the agriculture industry in Africa is in its youth, right? And so they need our technology and our experience in order for them to build a bioeconomy. And in the meantime, they still want to address sustainability and climate change. And they're going to import, biofuels and biomass and, up from around the country. It's important because of the economies of scale and the fit for use application, right? And what I mean when I say fit for use is that the product has to be a specific quality and quantity, et cetera, in order for it to be used in cars, in order to be used in these other applications. And if every country picks a different standard, you end up with a hodgepodge and do you know what I mean? A huge basket or market with different standards, and that's not fungible, right? And
Hmm.
so it's important that we recognize that if we're going to send a ship quantity, right, the transportation costs are going to be so much lower than if we try to ship a barrel or we try to ship an ISO container, and then it can be used, border across borders, and it's the same product, and they get better, cheaper, the business of the bioeconomy and the price is a big issue, especially in developing countries across
Hmm.
Africa. And so if they can't afford it, they can't use it, right?
Exactly.
Cheap coal, charcoal is real, and so we need this bioethanol to be able to compete commercially.
Hmm.
And so having the same standard across borders means that we can ship larger quantities. We don't have to have separate storage tanks. We don't have to pay for all these, segregation, and we really gain some streamlining and ability to ship bigger, quantities of the highest quality grade, right?
Hmm.
And then the product goes further and it can reach
Exactly.
more consumers.
Yeah, and as these countries begin to also develop their agricultural sectors, you mentioned, and it begins to grow and they produce their own bioethanol, then they also know this meets the standard of what we were getting previously or what we would want to produce. And then we can also do that across country trade and have the regional trade. We can have international trade. There's a lot of opportunities that come with that. And if I'm in Kenya, I'm getting the same consistent quality fuel as if I'm in Mozambique or Uganda or Rwanda. And that really helps add some assurance to the consumer as well.
Right, absolutely. When we were there, we saw that they have limited storage tanks, right? Like it's not that they have, these massive terminals, depots that we have in the United States. And so it's really important that, that we have ample storage,
Mhm.
but it's the same product, and it can go from, Maputo is trying to become a big import export hub, and it can reach all those inland countries if we have one product and we're
Mhm.
just facilitating the product, through the country and across the borders.
Exactly. Yeah. So the harmonization efforts and promoting standards, whether it's through ASTM or another organization, but having harmonization across these new products that are going into the marketplace is going to be really critical to the growth of the sector.
I agree. I agree. And so we're working with, all of these governments, right? And their standards organizations, even in country, right?
Exactly.
So that they can facilitate. It is ASTM International. Yes, we have a heavy US presence, but I think they told me there's more than 80 countries that are active participants across all their committees, and including, Committee E48. So we're
Hmm.
growing its international presence. And we're, through our efforts, we're educating, the various sectors of the government, the standards agency or the air quality agency or the policy leadership, executive branches. And so it's just, I think it's a network that we're just going to continue to grow. And, like I said, these standards are living documents. We're going to expand them. Maybe we do need a new standard when we get to, do you know what I mean? When we get to new stoves and new technologies, and, we're just going to continue to grow with the commerce and with the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you mentioned is really important too, that we work very closely on the ground with the national standards bodies and the policymakers and the private sector, the people who are going to actually have to be implementing the standards and utilizing them. And so that's
Right.
also a really important piece is just making sure that those standards are fit for purpose and appropriate.
Yeah, agreed, agreed. And we're gonna reach out to other committees and make sure that they understand what we're doing, and we have the support. And then, this thing kind of grows organically, right?
Hmm.
Like the further we get, and the more people that we talk to, then the more interest, right, that comes back to us, and we're going to expand our reach, right? And so I'm really excited about it. It's not just a feel good product. It
Hmm.
is an impactful air quality, human rights to have access to clean energy, right, for everyday use. And
100%.
and I am an environmentalist at heart, right? I mean, I believe in agriculture. I think we have so much untapped potential. I'm a farm kid here from Illinois, and I
Hmm.
see the benefits as we grow our, agriculture sector, and expand the products. And, you know, ethanol for cooking and energy use, like that I think we're just so young, right? Like we're still in our youth, and we're getting our feet underneath us. And it's really amazing that I can't wait for this industry to just, do you know what I mean? Just to blow up, to just grow
Skyrocket.
and grow and grow, right? Skyrocket. And it's going to be fun to be on the ground level, right? To be one of, for us to get this message out and to get this product out.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think you did such an amazing job summing that up. Uh, I think we actually made a standards conversation exciting, Christy.
Yay! They tell me,
Thanks to
Christy,
you.
they're like, you're so far down in the weeds on these things, and nobody understands what you're talking about. And I'm like, no, it's so important. And if you can't tell, I might be a little passionate about it,
Yeah,
right?
I
Just,
mean,
just
I
a
knew
little
if I,
passionate.
yeah, and I knew if I had to make standards exciting, I had to get you on to talk about it.
Oh, you're too nice. You're too nice. But yeah, it is. It's, I'm not the smartest scientist, but we've got some of the very best, business development folks like you. You're passionate about, you're smart, you've got the connections, and you know how to pull a project together. And then you bring in the nerds, the scientists like us, in to help, just to get the product out and to make sure they understand it. And then it makes the market grow. And
Yeah,
it's just a really exciting time, right? To,
it
to be
is.
in, to be in this
It
business.
it is really exciting time. Well, we're almost toward the end of our session, but I always end on a cooking or food related question. So I want to know from your more recent international travels, what has been the most interesting food that you've tried?
I think when I travel, I love to eat their food, right? Like
Yep.
everybody's like, "Oh, how was the food?" I'm like, "It was absolutely amazing." I thought that restaurant that we went up on the side of that mountain. Do you know what I mean? We had breathtaking views of the sunset and the food. Well, the jollof rice in Nigeria was
Yes.
delicious, right?
Yep.
It was the J rice or whatever they call it. It was amazing, and sometimes I don't know that I knew what I was eating, but it was delicious, right? It was
You don't ask.
exactly. It was amazing. And they love to share their culture, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's just, I don't know, probably one of the most endearing. They're just so excited to show you, what they do, what they make, what they eat, how they live.
Yep.
And yeah, the food has been amazing. And I don't know. I think the kebabs and a couple of the other things that we had, and when we were in Maputo, were just amazing. And then we went down to the Gold Coast, remember, and
Yeah.
we had fantastic food outside, and thank you for ASTM for facilitating our adventure and our discussions there. So it was amazing.
Yeah, well, I could not thank you enough for coming on today and sharing your expertise and all of your passion for this. I'm really excited to keep working with you on standards around bioethanol and see how much of an impact we can make.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. This is a great team to work with, and anything we can do to advance this, it's a humanitarian effort as well as do you know what I mean, climate change and all the great things. So I'm
Yeah,
excited. It's really interesting.
awesome. Thanks, Christy. Appreciate you.
Yes, all the time. Thanks, Alicia.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening. With over a third of the world's population lacking access to modern solutions and cooking with solid and polluting fuels like wood, charcoal, and kerosene, there are huge global impacts in multiple sectors. Pivot is passionate about opening access to household energy options around the world that also lead to reduced emissions, improved health outcomes, environmental protection, greater purchasing power, gender equity, and so much more. Join us for these personal conversations with farmers, fuel producers, distributors, stove manufacturers, policymakers, and consumers to learn about the dynamics that influence how people cook around the world. Please reach out to us at hello@pivotcleanenergy.org to find out how you can get involved. And we'd also be grateful if you found this information valuable and pass it along to friends, family, colleagues, your mailman, your grocer, anyone you know, and find some way to engage. Don't forget to follow us on our social media accounts like LinkedIn and Twitter. Check out our website at pivotcleanenergy.org. And of course, follow us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts so you can catch the next episode when it drops.